I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, son.
There's always a pecking order. The little peckers never mess with the big peckers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Bodybuilding Legends podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, my friend Roger Schwab, who was one of the head judges of the IFBB in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And he was also a great writer. He wrote a lot of articles for IronMan Magazine about the Mr. Olympia, and that's what we want to talk about today. So Roger, welcome to the show. It's good to see you again.
Good to be with you again, John.
Well, I'm sure you heard about the passing of Eddie Giuliani yesterday, huh?
You know, he was one of the really good guys.
Yeah.
Giuliani was no attitude. He was just nice to everybody. He had a million friends, just the greatest of guys, but he lived a pretty good, long, healthy life. He was really a mainstay of the golden era.
Yeah. Yeah, he lived to 87, so he lived a long life.
Yeah. He's a great bodybuilder. People don't realize, you know, he was a very muscular guy. He was short, but he was always competitive. And whenever he entered something, you could be pretty sure he would be in really good shape.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people saw him as like the manager of World's Gym and, you know, one of the mainstays of that crowd with Arnold and Joe Gold and Zabo. But they forget that he had a great competitive career starting at a pretty young age too, right?
Right. He lived, and, you know, he lived a healthy life. He was competitive. He always looked good. He never looked bloated.
Right.
Muscular, strong looking. He was the way, you know, that you wanted bodybuilders to look.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have that craziness. He had a look that, you know, gee, if I train hard enough, I might not look like him, but he's a good person to look to.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was right up there with Danny Padilla at the 77 Mr. America, you know?
He was good. You know, I met him in the early 70s, and it was really interesting because I mentioned to him about the first, it's a good anecdotal thing. I mentioned to him the first time I met him, Eddie, I said, you make sure that when you're not on the stage, when you're in the wings, that you keep your thighs flexed and your abs flexed. Because the last time I saw you, you relaxed there, and judges look, and they don't only look at the competitor who's posing. They'll look into the wings, and they want to see that you're really sharp. Now, he knew me from Adam. He didn't know me at all. But from that moment on, there was definitely a mutual respect, and he always looked to me, and I really liked him. I really liked him, especially the time he jumped into Arnold's arms during.
Yeah, right. And you were right there. You walked in with those guys, right?
In fact, yeah, I walked in with Arnold that day, and the first thing that happened was Arnold walked in, and it was really unstaged. Eddie just
was unstaged.
Ran over and jumped into his arms.
Yeah, you could tell it was improv, like it wasn't staged, because Arnold was like surprised when he did it, you know.
Eddie was a good.
Yeah, you could tell he was a good person, because I was reading all these things on Facebook yesterday where people were talking about him, and everybody had good things to say about him, you know. So you could tell you lived a good life when people always have positive things to say about you.
Yeah, he's very close to John Balick, and John Balick just couldn't say enough good things about it. And
yeah.
His time at Gold, and especially his time at World Gym.
Yeah. Yeah, I met Eddie 4 years ago. I went out to Gold's Gym in 2018. And I was training with Phil Williams. Remember Phil Williams? And Phil wants to train at 5 a.m. So we had to go to the gym at 5 a.m. And Eddie was there early in the morning. So I asked him to do an interview on my podcast, and he goes, "What's a podcast?" He had no idea.
He's like me. He's one of these old dogs, you know, who
is
magically challenged.
Yeah. All right, Roger. Well, I want to talk about some of these Mr. Olympia competitions that you were there. What was the first Mr. Olympia you saw? Do you remember?
First Mr. Olympia I saw was 1965. I mean, the first.
The first one, the very first one. Wow.
Which, in some ways, was the most exciting one.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You really had to see. Well, the early '60s were Larry Scott. In 1962, he won the Mr. America contest, IFBB. In 63, right after Harold Poole got beat in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania by Vern Weaver for the AAU Mr. America, he jumped organizations and he switched to the IFBB. And I guess Weeder thought that it'd be a great competition and would draw fans if both of them competed against each other.
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought that Harold would have jumped to the IFBB and competed in the Mr. America, but he went right into the Mr. Universe and he beat Larry Scott in 1963. It was a real eye-opener.
Wow.
So Scott came back the next year and won the universe. But in 65, the first Mr. Olympia contest, that was, to me, that was the height of Larry Scott's career. He won the next year in 66, but in 65, you were just a kid, John. You probably don't even remember, but he was so good.
Yeah.
You just couldn't believe when Larry Scott walked out, and the fans in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, who could be really loud when they wanted to, they went nuts over him. Shoulders and arms, and I remember he just looked really, really great.
Yeah.
You tended to overlook how good his legs were, but his thighs and his calves were very, very muscular, right up there with his upper body. And of course, he had this golden tan that you never saw before or probably ever again on a person. And he was just the epitome of the California bodybuilder.
Yeah. Wow.
Wonderful. So that was the first one. Then I saw 66, and I remember 66 was more competitors. I got a chance to meet Chuck Sipes, which was really a highlight of my young life at the time. And Draper was there, and just tremendous contest. And Szabo was there. I mean, he competed in another contest that night, but it was really, really great. And then they started to, then the next great one was 72, I think, 72 in Essen.
Yeah.
That Olympia, they still talk about it today and justifiably so. I mean, you had Newbray and Oliva and Franco and Arnold and Zane in the same competition. Think about it.
I know. Yeah.
You love this sport. You had to love Essen, Germany in 72.
Yeah. Did you see Arnold win in like 73, 74 when he was at his peak?
Yeah, I saw them both years.
Both of them. Wow. That's amazing.
I mentioned in print that unfortunately I said to Arnold, I think that your best shape was 73.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like that one bit. And and if you look at the pictures, he was right and I was wrong. He was best in 74.
Right.
That picture, there's an iconic picture of him walking up on the stage.
Yeah, on the stairs. Yeah.
You've seen it. He was really, really at the epitome of his physique.
Yeah.
Bigger than ever that year, and he was sharper than ever that year.
Now that was all the way back in 1974. So that's almost 50 years ago, right? And now his physique, even today, 50 years later, his physique still stands out, right?
Well, I'm the wrong person to talk to about bodybuilding 2020s. To me, this was the era. It all changed in the mid 90s, but 74, even 75 in South Africa, he was a little bit leaner, but very, very, very sharp, very good.
Yeah.
I mean, these were great years. I mean, he was the greatest bodybuilder ever.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to somebody at the gym the other day, and they said, Arnold, if he competed today, would have a hard time winning a state level contest. I'm like, are we talking about the same Arnold? Have you seen how he looked in 74 and 73? And like you said, even 75? I mean, there's no way. His physique was unbelievable.
Yep. And he probably should have stopped there. But, I wasn't in Sydney in 1980.
Yeah.
I've seen the pictures like everybody else. That could have gone too. The great thing about Sydney in 1980 was that there was so many guys showed up in such tremendous condition.
Yeah, I know.
Any one of the first 6 or 7 or 8 could really have have been declared the winner.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was Arnold, and I guess Arnold's maturity outweighed the great muscularity of the other guys, but pictures don't do him justice in that contest, especially his legs, which didn't look nearly as trained as they had in previous years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he won, and I wasn't there, so I just, you know, I preface everything I say about I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I heard what Boyer said and what Mentzer said and what Zane and Dickerson and Callender and Roger Walker said. None of them were very happy. Or
Right.
Dennis Marino.
Yeah. Now, if you would have went, Roger, would you have been an actual judge, or would you have been the head judge again?
I was the head judge of the IFBB.
Okay.
I confused myself. To me, as a matter of integrity, I had trained with Mike Mentzer in July and August of 1980. Mike lived in Ephrata, PA, which was near York, which was a couple hour, about hour and a half drive from Bryn Mawr, where my gym was.
Okay.
Whenever Mentzer was in the state, he would always come to Mainline and train with us. Everybody on the staff and all the members knew him, and he was very accessible. But he trained that summer at our club, and he was definitely in the best shape I'd ever seen him in. And I wrote a letter to Ben Weider and Oscar State saying, I'll go and I'll cover it, but I don't think it's fair if I judge it. I'm just too close with him right now, and I don't think it would be fair.
Yeah.
In retrospect, the history of bodybuilding probably would have changed if I was there.
Just as the head judge. So you would have been on stage.
I would have been a voting judge that year.
Oh, you would have been a voting judge. Yeah. Yeah.
Because Paul Graham ran the contest, and he would have made those decisions. And in 1981, oh my gosh, I don't even want to go there, but I was the head judge of that contest. I'm a non-voting head judge, but that was Oscar State's and my decision, because in 1981, the decision was that I would be up on stage with the competitors on stage while they went through their compulsory poses.
Yeah.
I would put a word into each of their ears about, what I knew, all their physiques backwards and forwards. And I would say, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And then I'd tell them the poses. But I wasn't a judge that year, a voting judge, and it's just as well. But if I had been, again, I think the history of bodybuilding would have changed. So there's 2 years that this one guy in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania at the time could have changed the history of bodybuilding.
Right. And
I don't lose sleep over it, but I will tell you that I've thought about it.
Yeah.
Amount of times.
Yeah, it's amazing. Even one judge would have made a difference, right?
So
It was that close with both Arnold and Franco winning in 80 and 81.
I could speak more frankly about 81 because I was there. But again, I think you and I have discussed it in the past. The point system, the way the IFBB set it up with Ben's desire to be recognized as a country, as a sport in the Olympics, really screwed placing up in IFBB contests.
Yeah.
Because saying, each competitor could get this, you could have 2 20s and 2 19s. A judge to do a job, everybody gets placed individually. 120, 119, 118. And also in those years, these judges had to hold up their score sheets. Like in the Olympics. They were intimidated. In my opinion, it wasn't fair. And it was putting these guys, myself included, in a bad position.
Yeah.
You see much better results on a placing system, 1 through 10.
Yeah.
Simple, and it would have been done right, and you would have had much better decisions.
Yeah. It's when we talk about the judging too, when you talk about today's bodybuilders and how it is today, now they developed another category called classic physique, because the bodybuilders with the good symmetry have kind of been pushed out of the way now because the guys are so big. And, they say, well, I just did a podcast the other day and they were saying, well, that's evolution. That's the bodybuilders getting bigger is evolution. But when you look at bodybuilding from the era that you and I came from, it is an art, and it's supposed to be judged on all the aspects of proportion and symmetry, and the presentation is a big part of it, as well as muscle mass and definition. It's all of it together. And so that's why it intrigues me when I look back at those older contests. Like the one that comes to mind right now is like 1982, where you had Frank Zane and Chris Dickerson, very aesthetic bodybuilders, and they were competing against Casey Viator, who was very big. Bertil Fox was in that contest. He's another mass monster. And then you had Mohammed McAway and Samir Bannout, who were smaller. But all of these guys were in one show. And the judges had to be intelligent enough and know what they were looking at and sophisticated enough to be able to judge all these aspects of the physique. And then you had the 3 rounds, which helped out. But it wasn't just who's the biggest and who's the hardest. It wasn't that easy. It was much more complicated than that.
You're definitely correct, except I was there in 1982.
Yeah.
I judged that contest. I had the results a little bit different, but it was a very hard contest to judge.
Yeah.
Well, when you mentioned Casey Viator, Casey had the potential to win more than one Mr. Olympia. He didn't win any Mr. Olympias. He never knew how to show his physique.
Yeah.
He was really Casey in 1971 when he won the Mr. America contest was actually quite a bit bigger than he was in 1982. These years later,
Wow, that's unbelievable.
When he went to the IFBB, he was sharper in the IFBB because as soon as he went to the IFBB, he realized in order to compete with the Zanes and the Bannouts and, like you said, in the Dickersons, he had to be sharper. And to me, he relinquished too much muscle. And he should have been who Casey could have been. That being said, Zane came in at 82, a little off, I'd say. He was showing his age just a little bit. Dickerson's elbows got everybody's attention. I don't know what was going on with those elbows, but and you don't judge a competitor on his elbows, obviously.
Right.
But it looked like it was either calcium deposits or growth hormone or whatever, but there was these 2 big golf-size balls on the end of his elbows. It was hard to overlook. The person who should have won that contest was Samir Bannout, and he was a sharpie. And it was another poor decision on my part and the judging panel because Bannout had not paid his dues yet.
Mm-hmm.
Was should have won the contest because he was in the best contest shape that day. Bertil was a second thought because Bertil had all the muscle in the world. Bertil had the muscle like in 2020 of these big guys.
Yeah.
He could never quite get hard enough. I heard he was better in 83 and I wasn't there in 83, but he never really got to the definition that the IFBB seemed to require to win that contest. But
yeah,
he had hellish muscles.
Yeah, freaky. Yeah,
lower body. He had the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you think it was maybe Samir's presentation? I mean, not his closing routine necessarily, but just the way he conducted himself on stage, the prejudging? Because I was watching the video of the prejudging of that contest, and even though he did probably have the best physique on stage that night, he wasn't really. He seemed like he was much more seasoned in 1983. Even 1 year later, he presented his physique much better.
And I think that you're right, and I think he would probably tell you that. I'm just saying, as far as the sharpest, hardest physique that day, not the shape, it was Samir, son of a gun. I had him 4th.
Did you really? Wow.
Yeah, it was a bad decision.
Yeah.
I had Zane, Dickerson, Casey, and Samir. I should have had Samir first, Dickerson or Zane and Casey 2, 3, and 4 in whatever order.
Yeah.
I just had known Casey, and Casey was a friend of mine, and I had trained Casey, and he relinquished size to get sharp, and I think he would have looked better fuller. That's just me.
Yeah. That's amazing when you say that he was actually bigger in 1971 and 19 years old than he was when he was competing in the IFBB. He had to be something to see in 1971.
Yeah, you had to see Casey, but up close and personal. He was god awful. That's he was a tremendous muscles, especially his limbs, his forearms, his bicep and tricep, his thighs, his calves. His pecs never really were tremendous, and his abs they're great, and his abs are great, but not at the highest level, I would say.
Yeah.
You and I have both seen pictures of Mike Mentzer with a head-on shot where he's just standing there without flexing.
Yeah.
To me, a friend of mine once said to me, who was the greater of the physiques, Mike or Casey? And I said, I thought that Casey was the greater of physiques, and I was wrong. Mike had more finished physique. Yeah. Mike's skin tone was never what Casey, tremendous stretch marks all over, and really didn't have the tautness of the skin that Casey had. Yeah. But as far as an overall symmetrical physique, I think, and people compare those two because they were built so similarly, Mike, it was like it wasn't like comparing Zane and Franco, but Mike and Casey were, and even Ray in that 1 year in 1979, the only year that Ray ever put it together, he was right there with those guys.
Wow. Yeah, Mike had to have a lot of respect for Casey, because he was in that America that Casey won, and they were the same age. They were both 19 years old at that time.
Exactly. They were friends, pretty much throughout life.
Yeah.
They made one mistake. Casey moved to California in 1979 when he went to the IFBB, and the three of them, Mike told me by phone, it was like it was Mike and Casey and Ray training together at Gold's Gym. And at the time, their egos, I think, got away from them a little bit. Mm-hmm. They were really training very, very heavy partials, partial inclines, partial squats, just to see how much weight they could handle. Yeah. Mike had always had an injured shoulder, and his shoulder had problems almost immediately, and that experiment stopped, and they went back to more sensible training. But as far as I know from Casey, he never got hurt. His bones were, his wrist must have been 8.5 inches. His wrists were the biggest I ever saw, with the possible exception of John Grimmick.
Wow.
Every time he shook my hand,
yeah,
his wrist and his hands were like a big old bear. And Kazmaier was another one who I met who had these gigantic wrists and hands.
Yeah.
That goes back so far, John. I hope my memory is correct, but still to me, that golden era, it was so much fun being part of this. Mm-hmm. And there's so much camaraderie. And every month you're waiting for IronMan and Muscle Builder to come out. And, nobody, it was just either you're in that world or you were not in that world. Yeah. And then Rio Blair and his protein earlier in the 60s, and Larry Scott with the bleached blonde hair. It was just so cool to be part of that. Yeah. I don't think it's there anymore. And as far as you said earlier about these guys today and the classic physiques and the muscle monsters, I'm wondering what kind of lateral raises these big guys do that you must not have done to get those delts the way they look today as compared to how ours look, or even Don Howard, how great his delts were.
Yeah, yeah.
They must have a very special deltoid exercise to have those big cannonball shoulders.
Right.
There's something else going on in there besides muscle.
Right, exactly, right. I'm reading Joe Gold's book right now, and he made a good point in there. And he was talking about the golden age of bodybuilding. And he said now with social media, we have so much interaction with all these guys. They have YouTube channels and they have Instagram, so they have to post stuff pretty much every day. He said back in the day, before all the social media came around, we only saw them in the magazines, as you mentioned. So we only saw them once a month, and we never heard them talk. We never saw them. We never saw videos of them. So the only time you would actually see them is if you went to a contest or if you got to see them guest pose. And that's where I think the magic was, because you never saw these guys. So it really was very, very special when you saw them in person. they had that aura like a movie star almost.
Isn't that a great point? You know, that's
Yeah.
something you never think about, but you're exactly right. It's when you got to the contest and you saw the names of the competitors, and you know, and you say, "Oh my gosh, we're going to get a chance to see these guys."
Yeah.
You heard about them.
Yeah.
Usually either New York or California or maybe in Chicago, but then you're never hearing about them once a month, just like you said.
Yeah.
And it created a mystique. And
Yeah.
that mystique was really a great part of that era.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I was lucky enough to go see the 77, 78, 79 Olympias. And I was a teenager. I was 14 to 16 years old. And I remember just like walking around the lobby, and you would see Larry Scott, and you'd see Dave Draper, and you'd see Reg Park. And you'd even see like guys who weren't national competition winners, like Dave Masterakis or Len Archambault or somebody like that. And you'd see him in the crowd, and like, oh, I recognize him. I know who he is. And it was just so special. And then if you saw like Zane walking through or Arnold walking through, it was like, wow, you know, it was just amazing.
Yeah, it was. And they were approachable. And every one of the guys you mentioned were good guys. 77, 78, and 79, those three contests. The audience participation in that sleepy Midwest town of Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah.
They really came to life because they loved these guys, and they loved when Corny would pose, or when Boyer Coase split his, you know, that right
bicep. Yeah.
They knew these guys, and if you saw a silhouette before the contest of them, coming onto the stage, you knew who the guy was.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's because of that you have these podcasts today, because people still love the aura of that era, which you really just don't see. It's just not there.
It's not there. No, it's changed. Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those contests, Roger. Let me pull out this 86. It was actually the 87 issue of January 87 of that first IronMan. And you wrote about the Mr. Olympia that year. And I used to love your articles, Roger. I actually just wrote a letter to, I'm trying to get Jake Wood, who's the owner of the Mr. Olympia. I was asking him, I said, we should do a detailed Mr. Olympia report, you know, like you used to do. And like Rick Wayne used to do, and Jack Neary used to do, you know, where he talks about every competitor and goes really into detail. Because the way it is now, and again, this is because of social media, it's covered live, you know, it's broadcast live as a pay-per-view event, I guess. You can watch it on your computer or your phone. And as soon as it's over, everybody goes out into the lobby, and then there's all these different podcast YouTube channels, and, you know, they'll have like 3 or 4 people who will talk about it. And then that's it. It's over. And there's no recorded history of it, you know? Like if I go on Muscle Memory and I'll look at the 1969 Mr. America contest, on the bottom of the results, it says related articles. And you can go to an article that was in Ironman or Muscular Development, and you could read all the details about the contest. And if people do that 10 years from now about this year's contest, this year's Mr. Olympia, they won't find anything, because there's only like a quick report of the top 10, but there's no details like you guys used to do, you know?
That, to me, that was the fun of the whole thing, you know, writing the contest reports up, and oh my gosh, you know, we got tremendous feedback. I would get from Perry, I would get, 100 letters.
Wow.
Not all of them that favorable, unfortunately, but for the most part, you know, there's only one winner. You know, there's only one winner. And you want to be as objective as possible, because it is your legacy and it is your dignity. And to tell everybody, well, everybody just looked great and everybody was this and that, you know, but then when you reread it, then what have I really said? So I made it a point after every contest that I judged to stay there after the contest. And I gained enough respect from these guys that they would talk to me and say, you know, how did you see it? And why did you see it this way? And I would really answer them. And I think for the most part, everybody walked away. If they didn't agree with me, they respected me. Greg DeFaro was a tough one. He was not crazy about the way I viewed his physique, which was really great. he was really good. But I referred to him as Rocky, and he didn't like that because it was Rocky was an underdog at the time, and he didn't want to be looked at as an underdog. He thought he was a champ, but you know, it was what it was. But I feel good about the fact that I was not only there, I said it how it was. They respected it. They respected me. I respected them. And it made my journey in this so much more meaningful than just being, you know, somebody who covered a contest who said everybody was great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Ricky Wayne, you know, I wasn't in his class. I mean, Ricky, God knows he could lay it out there and he could really beat you up. Jack,
Right.
Bartlett, these were really good writers. I mean, we all had fun together. We were all friends and questioned each other about our writings also, you know. So it was a camaraderie, John, and the bodybuilders and the writers and the judges, we all knew each other. There was some lousy decisions, but as I said many times, Joe Weider never influenced my votes. He never fixed any contest that I was in, apart from the idea that, as I've mentioned to you and in print, I didn't pick they wanted so much for this international recognition that they wanted a judge for from every country. That was a poor decision. There were some really great judges and there were some poor judges, and they should have stuck with the great ones.
Yeah.
The unbiased ones, the objective ones. And we wouldn't have had the bad calls that we had during those times.
Yeah.
But saying as you were about Columbus in the upper 70s, they were magnificent contests and usually really, really good decisions. Every one of them.
Yeah. There really wasn't, until we got to 1980 and 81, there really wasn't too many controversial decisions, you know. And you mentioned Joe, and what I was really impressed with reading some of these old articles, like I just reread the 1981 Mr. Olympia report from Rick Wayne that was in Joe Weider's Muscle and Fitness magazine. And he was very, very critical of that contest. And Joe didn't edit that at all. They just let it go. You know, Rick wrote whatever he wanted to write and they put it all in there, you know, and he was talking about Joe Weider. Then he was talking to Arnold. He had a lot of quotes about Arnold where Arnold was saying, oh, Joe's an actor. And he acted like he was surprised about the contest. And I mean, I'm like, wow, this is really great reading. You know, it was great stuff to read because it was really authentic and they didn't edit it all. They didn't water it down at all. So I was impressed with Joe Weider that he put all that stuff out there. You could tell he was probably a real bodybuilding fan. You know, he wanted it all out there. He wanted everything in this magazine.
Well, there was no one like Ricky Wayne was totally thorough. Ricky Wayne wanted to get down to the truth about that 81 contest.
Yeah.
I'm at work one day and I got a call from Ricky right off the bat. He said, I want to know why this happened. And I want every freaking detail. And he wanted to publish that in his book, I think was Head and Shoulders Above the Rest, or one of the books he wrote about 1981. And look, at that time I was smart enough that I documented everything that I did. So I documented my letter to Ben Weider saying, after 1980, we cannot afford to take a chance to have a decision so controversial that could bring down this federation. And he assured me. I wrote the same thing to Oscar State. But the strange thing was, John, at the competitors' meeting before the contest, and you saw these 7 judges from 7 different countries, Oscar or I or one of the heads of this asked, are there any objections at all from the competitors? And there wasn't one. And somebody should have stood up and say, I don't know this person, or this person's from Italy. And does this person have any business dealings with anybody in this contest? They weren't asked. In retrospect, maybe I should have did more than I did. But at least I documented it. It was enough that Ricky was satisfied, you know, that the contest was on the up and up and the chips fell where they may, which were the wrong way.
Yeah.
Frank didn't deserve to win that contest, and I think he knew it.
Yeah.
Arnold knew it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember Arnold and Joe Weider didn't even come out on stage and hold up Franco's hand.
Oh my God, it was pandemonium.
Yeah.
There was almost a riot.
I know. Yeah.
Once before, the closest thing I ever saw to that was 1963 in the Zembo Mosque in Harrisburg when Vern Weaver beat Harold Poole in probably the worst decision in the history of bodybuilding.
Yeah.
There was chairs, that were movable. People took those chairs and were throwing those chairs up.
No kidding. Wow.
It was cool. Of course,
Yeah.
they didn't do it to Harold because he was 19. And the AAU at that time had never had a black Mr. America, besides the fact that I think he had a voice impediment, speaking impediment. And
Yeah.
he should have won that contest so hands down, but he didn't. And so it was pandemonium.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I loved about your articles when you wrote those Mr. Olympia reports was you would go back and talk about history. And this 1986 Olympia that I got from this IronMan magazine, you talked about how, first of all, how Haney was so dominant in the show. And you said nobody was that dominant until, and then you talked about, here, I got it right here. Yeah, you talked about the Zembo Mosque in Harrisburg, when the AAU nearly sent bodybuilding to an early death with the colorblind decision rendering Vern Weaver Mr. America in 1963. And then you also talked about Sergio in 72, about how dominant he was, even though he lost the show. And then you also talked about Arnold in 73. And then you could also argue that Casey in 71, when he won the America, and Frank Zane in 78, when he won the Olympia, were also that dominant status where like very few people could, no one would dispute the contest.
What brings to mind right now, and I think it was what was the year that Tony Pearson won Mr. America?
78.
So Tony Pearson, I think it was Cincinnati in 1978, and Tony Pearson was really muscular, won the contest. But in my opinion, who could have won the contest was the guest poser that night. Do you remember who it was?
Bill Pearl.
Right.
Wow.
You had to see it. This is Bill Pearl in 1978, and Pearl was born, I believe, in the 30s.
1930.
Okay, so he was, what was he, 45 years old or something like that?
48, yeah.
Whatever. He comes out that night as the guest poser, and he was the best physique.
Wow. Damn.
You just had to see him. I mean, growing up, when a guy in Philadelphia, John Fritchie, who owned the gym, used to have the Mr. Philadelphia contest, and he used to bring in bodybuilders. But one year he brought in Bill Pearl. And for a young kid who wanted to get interested in bodybuilding, to see Bill Pearl in person perform, and he posed tremendously. But this was what bodybuilding should look like, in my opinion. There was none of the vascularity that you see, or any. There's none of that. It was none of the grainy look, maybe.
Yeah.
And his abs weren't Zabo's abs. It's a little bit like John Grimmick, if you ever saw John Grimmick.
Yeah.
Grimmick, when people saw pictures, if you saw him in person, you had a different feeling about him than you did in pictures. He was that good. But Bill Pearl in pictures and in person, you just had to see this man to believe how great he was.
Yeah.
Head and shoulders above the rest. And this night, guest posing in 1978, which was 7 years past his last Mr. Universe win.
Yeah.
He was the best man on stage that night.
Jeez. Wow.
Isn't that great?
That's unbelievable. How did Bill Pearl pose, Roger? Like you said, obviously he's not doing anything flashy, but I heard like Boyer Coe told me, he said, when you saw this guy on stage, it was unbelievable.
No twisting, no nothing. Just standing there looking like Hercules.
Yeah.
That's what he looked like. And you had to see his shoulders and pecs and quads and calves and arms, everything. Somebody once said he never won subdivisions. He never won subdivisions because every body part is a body part. Everything flowed together on Bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was straight on poses. he had one pose with his arms up over the head like this, you know it, and his regular bicep pose. I never remember him ever doing a front lat spread.
Yeah.
But he would do this tricep pose where those triceps of his were.
Yeah.
They were so good. Everything he did was just perfection, and he knew it. And he was strong, and he exuded strength also. Wasn't, it wasn't like that the guy couldn't walk 10 feet without his thighs ruining his walk. He walked like a man. He was strong. He exuded strength. He bent bars, blew up hot water bottles. The man did it. The man had it all and did it all. He could have been, it would have been very interesting, let's just say it, to see him and Arnold at their very, very best. I think that Arnold's muscularity in 74 would outweigh Pearl's maturity and magnificence in 71, but it would have been close.
Yeah.
It would have been close.
That's one contests that really should have happened, and I think we all regret that it never did. Arnold and Pearl in 71, that would have been amazing.
And Oliva was there too. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
Very different, three very different physiques.
Yeah.
Would not, I love being a judge. I would not have liked to have been a judge in that contest.
Yeah. Plus just the onstage interactions between all of them. I mean, it just would have been amazing, man. Unbelievable. So what did you think of Lee Haney going back to 86? Lee had won now 2 Mr. Olympias before that, and this was his 3rd. And, I was at that contest too in 86, and he really was just so head and shoulders above the rest, right?
I think in that article, if I'm not mistaken, I wrote so many of them. I mentioned what Boyer Co. had stated.
Yes, that's the one.
If you have it in front of you, you could read it, because I think that was, he said exactly the right thing, and Lee Haney transcended it that night. Yeah.
Yeah, he said he believed it was 1983 Olympia physique man Boyer Co., who survived in the bodybuilding limelight for nearly 20 years, made an observation based on his experiences, and I will paraphrase, a problem with the trade magazines is that they create the illusion for the reader that the bodybuilding champion can and should make steady, if not spectacular, progress on a yearly basis. Co stated further that realistically, this is not physiologically possible. And in this regard, Boyer is correct. But a strange thing happened on the way to the 86 Olympia. Someone did show undeniably remarkable improvement. And what's more, the man displaying this dramatic change was already unanimously recognized as the best bodybuilder in the world.
I think that says exactly.
Yeah.
Say.
Yeah, Lee was, I saw that contest, like I said, in 86. I saw him win a couple of times. And, and there were some great bodybuilders in that era in the 80s, because the bodybuilders definitely stepped up from the 1970s. And, but Lee just had that V taper and, that structure, and he was taller than most of the guys. And he just dominated. And he had that great stage presence as well, that smile and everything. And, he acted like a champion every time he won.
Yeah. And he had to be good, because the smaller guys he was competing against always seemingly came in very sharp.
Yeah.
Always looked good. Labrada never came in out of shape. Gaspari never came in out of shape. But Haney was in a league of his own.
Yeah. Gaspari was really good that year too.
Oh, he was good every year. Everything remarkably changed in 1993.
Yeah.
That was the year.
Yeah. Let me go back to 77, Roger, and we'll talk about that first Olympia that Zane won. And you wrote about this also in IronMan Magazine. And the contest talk before the show was that it was going to be Robbie, because Robbie was looking unbelievable all year. And also Ferrigno was supposed to be one of the top guys, but Lou ended up not doing it because of the Hulk. So when you saw Zane on stage, were you expecting Zane to be the winner before the show, or did you think Robbie was going to do it based on all the pre-contest hype?
I thought Robbie was going to win.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't have any doubt in my mind. All you had to do was look at Robbie do a front double biceps, and I think you can close the book.
Yeah.
He just, he was an enigma, Robbie. He was seemingly in better shape in the earlier parts of the year. And when October came, he just seemed a little bit off. And you can't come in a little bit off when Frank Zane is in the contest. You just can't.
Yeah.
Because Zane would pose better. Zane was sharper. But Robbie at his best in 76 in Montreal, I think, or in early 77 when they were having the Grand Prix contests, I think that he could have won 77. It was very close. But Robbie a little bit off, couldn't beat Zane not off. And that's seemingly what happened throughout the 70s.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Zane would only compete, I think, in the Olympia.
Yeah. Just the Olympia. Yeah.
But Danny and Mentzer and Robbie had great contests amongst themselves at the Night of the Champions and those other Grand Prix contests, I guess they call them, or not, before the Olympia. But to answer your question again, I thought Robbie would win. And once he got on stage in the first moment, I knew he would.
Yeah. 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 You talked about Zane and you said Zane was the first to appear. He was number one that year, remember? He had the number one.
He ran right out on the stage. I remember like yesterday.
Yeah. He said Zane possesses the flowing lines and shape of muscle, which immediately sets him apart from any other competitor. Tonight was the finest I've seen him. This man has been a champion since 1968 when he won the IFBB America. Every body part is a strong point, tremendously detailed back and striated lumbar area. His legs, though not large, have nearly perfect shape and proportion. His posing routine, of course, is polished and displays the Zane physique to its apex. Most of his posing routine emphasizes his torso and abdominal development with arms away from the body or overhead. His presentation this night is ended with a clenched fist overhead. The pressure of the event weighed heavily upon Zane. He had seemed more hyper on stage this year than before. The usual calm Zane facade was but a surface for a cauldron of emotion just beneath. He knew this must be his year. And it was. And he did have the crowd behind him that year too, I remember.
Yeah. I don't know what my words were about Robbie, but I bet you they are almost what we have discussed in the previous couple of minutes, that I could tell right away when Robbie came out, it wasn't going to be him. But Zane was at his best that year, up until that year, but he got better. He got better. And I think he reached his peak in 79. He should have retired then.
Yeah.
But, he could have been great. He could have, I take that back. He could have been great in 80. He had that injury. Around the pool or whatever it was that he got hurt. But he was awfully good in 80. I mean, he was lighter 10 pounds, but if you look at the pictures and the details, I mean, he was as sharp as he was in 79, maybe even sharper. He was just smaller. And he couldn't have been smaller that year in 80. But wow, man really knew how to put together. When they called him the chemist, he must have been.
When he just stood to the front, he was like perfection. It's just the way his body flowed,
Yeah, really. I mean,
about Robbie, you said Robbie was the first of the over 200-pound Olympia competitors. He was, of course, the pre-contest favorite and did not disappoint. Robbie was apparently heavier than I had seen him and nearly as sharp. A past criticism has been an absence of a personable, charismatic posing routine. Tonight, Robbie was a showman. There was no 3 or 4 poses in splitting the scene this night. This routine was longer, more creative and artistic than before. It did not take long for Robbie to know that the 77 Olympia was the fight of his life. Although Corny's posing had created a near riot, Robbie figured that the final confrontation would be between himself and Frank Zane. So it was that during the final pose-off at the Mr. Olympia contest, Robbie Robinson, in unprecedented style, evacuated his position in the center of the competitors and brushed his way next to Frank Zane. Here was the real battle of the night, as each man posed with almost hyper intensity.
that was the excitement of the night.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was disappointed that he lost, but I think that I just think he knew it. I think he knew it. I don't think he was as good as he was in the previous year in Montreal. I think it was 76.
Yeah. Well, I think your on-stage presence has a lot to do with it. And I remember one thing I was reading with Rick Wayne's article about the 81 Olympia was he said Danny was a little subdued in his presence. You know, he wasn't as aggressive as Tom Platz was or as Roy Callender was. And he figured that may be the reason why he didn't place as high. Because I think when people see pictures of that contest and they see Danny, they go, oh, he should have won. But they weren't there and they didn't see, you know, how he was on stage and what was going on with the prejudging, you know, and that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it is. But he was the best physique that night, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a break. The guy was probably 160 pounds at the heaviest.
Yeah.
But he was so little, and he was so put together. There was just no weaknesses.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it was between him and Callender. Callender, he's another guy you just had to see in person.
Yeah.
How good he was.
Right.
He had it all. His calves were high, yeah, but he was very, very good. He was great. Dickerson was Dickerson. You could always count on Dickerson for being in shape when he came to the contest, always throughout his whole career.
Yeah.
He was never off. It was just, did he have enough muscle to be Mr. Olympia? That's all.
Yeah.
And Platz was at his best that night.
Yeah.
But did his upper body really stand with his lower body? I guess that night most people would have said yes, because I think in retrospect, from what I've read over the years, from the people who want to comment on that contest, they thought Platz should have been the winner of that contest.
Yeah.
I didn't think so. But and then it was all over for him because he tore his right bicep.
Yeah.
The next year, and that was the end of his really meaningful chance to win the Olympia.
Yeah. But he did have, and I was reading that 86 Olympia, he did have a great routine that night. And the crowd really connected with him. Remember that? Where, you know, it was at the end of his career. I think he retired 1 year later. But he really connected with the crowd that night in 86.
You know, as soon as he flexed his thighs and did, you know, what he did, he connects with that. He was
right.
You know, but he was, you know, he kept on going. It was, you know, if you love that type of physique, you know, he was robbed, but in 81 at least. But he had his fans. He made enough money. I think he did great on the sport. He knew how to sell himself.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And he did it very, very successfully.
Yeah.
Not everybody knew how to do that, but he did.
But
Yeah, he did. And he had courses, and he was, you know, the Golden Eagle, and he had those, you know, those kids that everybody, you know, and you remember you saw the articles where he squatted 50 reps with some god awful weight or something like that.
Right.
You looked at him and you believed it.
Yeah.
And people who I respected said he trained harder than anybody.
Yeah. I remember I saw a video of Tom, and this was in the 80s. And he said when he turned pro, he looked at his life and his career differently. He was like, now I'm a professional. I have to go on the road. I have to guest pose. I have to do seminars, you know. So he didn't look at, you know, like it was just competing. He knew that he was a professional. He looked at it differently.
Smart.
Yeah. 78 was also interesting, Roger, because you did an article again for IronMan, and this was Zane's second win. And I want to read this paragraph here where it says, it was several minutes past 3:30 on this Saturday afternoon when announcer Len Boslin spoke to the anxious, overflowed audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the lightweight contestants in the 78 IFBB Mr. Olympia contest. And then he said, it is my gut feeling that within seconds of that announcement, an overwhelming percentage of the onlookers realized simultaneously that Frank Zane had defended his title spectacularly. Zane was the first to appear in the lineup, and it seemed endless seconds before the rest of the class followed him onto the stage. Zane nearly swept across the stage as if he were the only contestant. It was immediately evident that he was totally secure with his preparation. Realizing he was near or at total perfection of his development, Zane had seemingly already mentally projected himself as the winner. That's awesome.
Yeah.
He really was remarkably improved from the year before, and he always did have that mental attitude where you could tell he prepared himself mentally for this victory. He visualized it with his dreams and all that, and his meditation or whatever else he did. And so when he arrived on stage, he was totally different than a lot of the competitors.
The mind is a very powerful tool if you use it correctly.
Yeah.
And he would, as you said, he could create that aura of a winner. And not everybody could do that, because not everybody, would believe that they were a winner, and they would come into the contest as, I have a chance.
Yeah.
He would come into a contest saying, I've won this contest. If I've prepared for it and I've won it, if I do everything I know that I have to do, my body is already there.
Yeah.
And it projected itself.
Yeah.
You could see it. Plus, he had already won the previous year, and he was Mr. Olympia. And when you go into a contest that that you're already the champion, you have a little bit of a psychological leg up.
Yeah. 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 And I always felt like when I was going to see the Olympia, my attitude was like, I wonder if Zane's going to do it again, because he wasn't a big guy. So he wasn't a dominant winner like Haney was, or some of the other guys later on, some of the really big guys. So you're always wondering, can he put it all together? And that's what Zane did. He put it all together. He was ripped. His posing trunks were perfect. His tan was perfect. His posing was perfect. And he really willed himself almost to win those contests by doing everything correctly, because he didn't have the size advantage that Sergio had, or Arnold, or Haney,
You're exactly right. And and I guess you're going to get into it, but he needed to have that perfection going into 79, because 79 to me was a real challenge.
Yeah.
Mentzer came into that contest really good.
Yeah.
You look at the pictures, they're so different in their physiques. But again, Zane, I judged that contest, and I like Mike. Zane did it again. And Zane did it again because he knew he was the winner, and Mike was the challenger. And Mike, in the pose down, got carried away and just started throwing poses where Zane was calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah.
And on that stage in front of all those people, that's how you had to pretend yourself as the winner.
Right. Yeah, and it was different back then too, because they had the under 200-pound class and the over 200-pound class. So Zane and Mike weren't compared at all until they got to the pose down at night. So that was something they changed the next year when they only had one class. But back then it was kind of different with the two classes too.
Arnold said in 1980, according to print anyway, that when him and Mike almost came to physical confrontation, that Arnold said, Mike, we all know you lost last year because you're something to the effect that your stomach was.
Yes.
But I don't recall it that way at all. I think that Mike in 79, his abs looked really sharp.
Yeah.
Very muscular and sharp. He carried a lot more body weight than Zane did, and he was almost as sharp, but he didn't have the presentation or those fine lines that Zane had.
Yeah.
He didn't win, but he was awfully close. I don't know what the final vote score was, but it was tight, real tight.
Yeah, I think Mike was 20 pounds heavier, because one of the things I always liked too about your contest reports, Roger, was that, this is of course when they were weighing them in, because they had a under 200, over 200-pound class, but you would always list their exact weight, which was really cool, because, sometimes people will exaggerate. Years later, people will say they weighed this or that, but you had the exact weight. So here it is for posterity. And with Zane, let's see what he was. 190.2. Yeah. So you said here was the 1979 version of Zane, 5 pounds heavier at 190.2 pounds, tan and skin texture deeper and richer than ever. First impressions, definite fuller appearance in the quadriceps and upper arms. However, a slight strain in the abdominals where none appeared last year. These definite early conclusions, nobody in the under 200s was now that much bigger than Zane. Secondly, his abs, when flexed, were as sharp as ever. His total physique was again the most finished and popular with the audience. However, when relaxed, softer than 1978. Third, he was not the winner as soon as he walked on stage as he was last year. How the crowd loved him, I wondered if Zane had already projected himself as the winner. And then with Mentzer, you said, Mike Mentzer at his best. I still remember that line. I remember when I was a kid and I read this, and I still remember that. What a sight, 209.5 pounds of awesome muscle. Mentzer had the look of a winner. The first notable improvement was the abdominals, a very deep, sharp line stretched from sternum to navel, invisible, no visible fat. That in itself would have been enough. However, from the back, Mentzer was even more unbelievable when he was announced that over national television as a weak point is now the most thick cut-up back musculature around, with teres, infraspinatus, and lumbar visible and ripped. Frank Zane had a battle on his hands in the name of Mike Mentzer.
I was right.
Yeah.
Contest. What a contest. And then Mike, if he had any chance at all, he blew it during the pose down.
Yeah. Yeah.
We love it. He was learning at the time. But I'll tell you, as sharp as Mike was in 79, in the summer of 1980, when he was training with me, he was even sharper.
Yeah.
He always carried a trifle of what they would call water, but I think was subcutaneous fat right below his navel.
Okay.
1980, he had veins, and that where it used to be that fat was veins. And he went to Sydney. Oh my God, really ripped. But in Sydney, when I saw the pictures, his pecs didn't look as full as when I was training with him.
Yeah.
I tended to believe that was just the pictures that I was seeing. But other people have commented on it. And so, you know, I guess they were right. But I wasn't there. So 70 was the last time, or 80 in the summer was the last time I saw him, and he was, to me, unbeatable.
Yeah.
He was so unbeatable that he had projected himself that he was going to win in Sydney. He really thought he was going down there to win.
Yeah.
He didn't know Arnold was going to compete, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he thought he could. He had read about Zane being lighter because of the accident, and he really thought Zane was his main competition. I don't think he realized how good Boyer Coe came in 1980.
Yeah.
Boyer Coe, oh my God. I mean, he could be up and down.
Yeah.
When he was in calendar that year, the same thing.
Yeah.
Roger Walker, even same thing. Dennis Tenorino, who ever since he won the Teenage Mr. America way back in 65 or 66, he was overlooked for so many years. And this guy was tremendous. I mean, there was no weaknesses. Judges just weren't into his physique for some reason.
Yeah.
This guy didn't have a weak body part, did he? Not that I recall.
Maybe the back. The back wasn't as good as the front.
Yeah, maybe the back. But from the front, his abs were
His abs were incredible. Yeah. He was wide and tall. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the back, you're right, John. I think he was. He didn't turn around as well as he was from the front.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mike was, traveling to Australia. He might have flattened out a little bit. Who knows, And I remember reading in Jack Neary's article in Muscle and Fitness that he said Mentzer had turned his hotel room into a sauna, and he had closed all the windows and turned the heat up in the hotel room just to, get rid of more water. So maybe he took it a little bit too far, a little bit flat, like you said, with his chest.
Yeah, maybe.
One other guy I want to mention, who was one of my favorites, was Kal Szkalak, and he was in the 78 Olympia. And let me see where you talk about him. Okay. Finally, Kal Szkalak. When Kal first walked out, I said to myself, he's not going to win it. On first glance, his midsection was somewhat too smooth, and his legs, while improved, were not there with his gigantic shoulders, chest, and arms. It was only within seconds, however, when those instinctive feelings left. When Szkalak starts his posing routine, his personality and the mood which he is able to create is electric. Look up the word charisma. This man has it. If he doesn't have the best physique in the world, he doesn't know it. He has the ability to excite an audience. He can present himself in so positive a way that you find yourself only seeing his strong points, never his weaknesses. By the conclusion of the prejudging, there were more than a few believing that in the conclusion, it would be Zane and Szkalak. And I was at that show, and I agree with you. I mean, Kal, when he posed, the crowd was going crazy. And I've got pictures from the little camera I had, and you can see people's arms up in the air, you know, in the audience, because they were all cheering for Kal. And I think a lot of people were even standing up for him.
Really, that's true. I saw him in Philadelphia when the Mr. AAU, Mr. America in 76.
Yeah.
And he was a deserving winner, although a fellow by the name of Joe Means was
Shredded
that day, but and one most muscular, but Kal deserved to win. And I had seen Kal train in Philadelphia years earlier. When he moved to California, he improved immensely. And he was pale and white in Philadelphia, and he was rich and tan in California. And he knew how to take a crowd he gripped them, and he knew how to pose. And he, just like I said in the write-up, at the beginning you didn't see it, and by the end you thought he was the man.
Yeah.
And he almost was.
Yeah.
And then he became Jesus on the cross, and he at the end of the contest he put his head down and
right.
crucified. But I didn't buy it. I mean, I think he probably placed where he deserved that night. He was an awfully great physique, but he was competing against awfully great physiques.
Yeah, you said what happened next was unforgettable. 5th place, Kal Szkalak. The catcalls and booing filled the auditorium. Szkalak stood shaking his head in disbelief. The boos turned instantly to cheers when Szkalak flashed a double biceps, immediately followed by most muscular. With the noise at a crescendo, the unforgettable Szkalak, feet crossed, head tilted, arms stretched wide, eyes closed as if he were letting the loud voices know that this was been his crucifixion. In the seconds following, as the others awaited their places, he left the stage. How this scene will be handled by the media will be known sooner or later. In reflection, there will be those who were there, and definitely more who were not there, whose conditioned reflex will be to immediately condemn Szkalak's actions. The opposing spectrum of thought, however, will see Szkalak's actions as a creative, momentary response to his demise this evening. Yeah, it was creative.
Stand by those words.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so great that you did these articles because you were there, you saw it, you recorded it, you got the weights, like I said, and it's such a big difference when you're there and you record it right after, right? So you remember everything that happened on stage, and then it's there for history, you know?
That's right. Great times.
Yeah, those were some great days, right, Roger?
Yes, sir.
All right, Roger. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It was great seeing you. I haven't talked to you in, like I said, a few years. So I love the fact that these articles are still with us, if you're still lucky enough to have the magazines. And they really are part of history. And I'm glad you were there. And I appreciate you joining me again so we could talk about those old days of bodybuilding, which I'll never forget.
I will always be there for you, John. I respect you. I respect your great career. I respect that you're still training hard these days, and
Thank you.
you're still at it. So, you know, you're a voice now in the industry. Let it be heard.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I appreciate it. And if I'm ever out in Philadelphia, I'll look you up and we
I'll be
can
there.
have a workout or work a dinner or something.
Always.
Okay. All right, Roger. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon again, hopefully.
Bye-bye.
Bye.